Good evening. Good evening. Welcome. If you're here, it's Monday night, it's 7 o'clock. You have made it here to the CARES Program Speaker Series. Welcome back. The CARES Program stands for Communities and Relatives Empowered for Support. And what kind of support? It's support for those who are working or have family members dealing with addiction. Every week, we aim to bring a professional expert trained in addiction, who has experience to be able to share information. The idea of our program is we want to build a community where you can feel support, we can be provided education, and know resources that you can share and take home with you. So tonight is a very special night because I have Gerson Bravo here with me. Gerson is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He's also a licensed professional counselor. He is also someone who has been a minister for over 25 years and understands the balance of communities in faith-based spaces. He's also a husband of 20 years, is it this year? Mm-hmm. So celebrating his 20th year anniversary, married, and with 5 amazing children as well. He also has a passion for working in the space of addiction and recovery. So what we'll do tonight, as we do with all of our speakers, is we'll give the platform and space for information to be shared. We'll have a bit of a Q&A, and then offer the space for anyone in the crowd or online that may have questions. So with that said, Gerson, the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you to Cornerstone Church for allowing this platform. It's an honor to share some insightful and educational opportunities to grow and learn from this very delicate subject, and understanding that as a marriage and family therapist myself, actively serving in the communities, this is a thing that is a process, and it's a challenge that comes with also surprises, because we learn all the time. In my 20 years of marriage, I've learned that there's always something to grow and something to learn. And so I appreciate the opportunity to share this evening, and I look forward to talking about how family members are impacted by addiction and these kind of challenges that are very difficult to talk about. Yeah.
And Gerson, this theme that we have going on, this first theme, you're the first of 4 speakers that over the next month here, we'll have speakers talk about understanding addiction, understanding someone or a loved one that's going through addiction. We hear lots of information everywhere, and we have families that come in crisis. So what is something that you wish more families would know about their loved one going through addiction?
You know, we talk about empathy a lot in our field, and it's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to be relatable. A lot of people easily can express sympathy, but very few can actually step into the shoes and feel empathetic towards someone's suffering and pain. And sometimes what happens that in understanding someone that goes through such an ordeal, and that as a marriage and family therapist, I look through the prism of the lens of systems. And when I look at a family, I think of family systems and how one individual in that ordeal will entangle everyone in that system into that pain and that suffering. And so that's one of the foundational pieces of various items that we're going to look at, various factors that actually contribute towards understanding, getting a better picture, expanding our lenses to know where this is going, and not just where it started.
And Gerson, you have experience working in many different communities. You have worked in counseling and ministry in different areas, both in English-speaking churches and communities, Spanish-speaking, also Korean communities where you have worked in the past. How different is the experience of family members across those cultures when it comes to addiction and what families are going through?
There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of grief. It's taboo in some communities to even mention or say. It's a subject of dishonor for some families. And in understanding these different communities, how they look at this is that they approach it with very little understanding and education. And what we're doing here today is possibly the first step in many to psychoeducate our families, our communities, and understanding that shame is a normal part of the process. Kind of like the 7 stages of grief and loss, where someone will go through various overlapping feelings and experiences as they try to get through that difficult time in their life. So I like to look at that as a really great model. Today, what we're doing here is actually trying to shift our perspective. That's really what I wanted to kind of dive in and talk about a few things right off the bat. When we talk about addiction, one of the things that we want to define is, what is that? And sometimes what we need to understand is, because addiction is something that can be experienced differently by many different people, the basic definition of addiction is that it's a neuropsychological disorder that causes the individual, it's literally characterized by this persistent urge or to use a drug or to engage in a behavior that is produces some kind of reward for the individual. But in turn also, despite that reward, it also brings upon the individual and the family substantial harm to their health on various levels, their sleep, their energy, their relationships, and so forth and so on.
When you talk about relationships, I know that we had talked before, and you said something that I'd never heard anyone mention before, which was that the addiction is a relationship bond. Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Yeah, this is maybe familiar to some of you. If this is the first time hearing it, this is great. I wanted to mention that one study that was done back in the 1970s by a Canadian psychologist, and when he did this experiment, Dr. Bruce Alexander, he tried to demonstrate by using rats. Now, human beings, obviously, we're not rats, but this was a simple study experiment just to see behaviors, how these chemicals affect the brain and so forth and so on. So he put a rat in a cage, and it was water that the rat was fed, and also water with some kind of chemical or drug. And what was observed was that the rat got chemically hooked to that chemical. But one of the things that Dr. Alexander noticed is that, well, obviously it's an empty cage. It's just got water and then another water laced with drugs. And so he said, what if addiction is not some chemical hook? What if there's more to it? And so he thought of coming up with an idea called the rat park, where he introduced to that environment, that cage, lots of cheese, lots of tunnels, lots of other rats to have relationships with. And what was noticed, it wasn't 100%, but on a high level, near 100%, the rat came away distracted and focused on other things and became disinterested in the water that was laced with drugs, and played and ate and did all these other things that drew it away from this chemical. So what's interesting is, what if it's not just a biological thing? What if it's not even a chemical hook? What if it's just tied to environment and the way that human beings innately, naturally want to bond and connect, either with someone or something? So in understanding that, I think that's a really huge step in the right direction, because I feel like that study helps open the conversation about, well, there's context here. If someone is left in their pain and they're looking for relief and they don't have many options and they isolate, whether it's trauma or grief and loss or some event that really left them feeling really devastated, and they only have what's in front of them. It could be pornography, it could be gambling, it could be alcohol, it could be a numerous amount of things. They'll go for that because that's what gives them immediate relief. But the suggestion is, from the study, is that if we introduce other elements, other things within the environment, will make a huge difference in helping the person break away from that addiction.
So I hear that study, and I start thinking,
Yeah.
well, if we were working with rats and
Yeah.
the environment is key and we want to change that,
Yeah.
what about the families out there that say, but I've done my best, I've created an environment, I've given everything, and the substances now come and just taken this person to a different environment and it's hard for them to come back. So how does that family, or what should the family do to try to win their family member, or can they?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I appreciate that question. Obviously, regardless of what you can and cannot control, there's a key element in helping understand addiction, is whatever it is that you're doing, be consistent. So if you are providing a place of safety, that place of safety be consistent. I know that here's the issue, guys, that usually our brain, because we are emotional beings, right? And so we look at a situation and we look at it as an emotional situation, right? And so it's natural. We obviously go through our feelings. We're upset, we are angry, we feel betrayed, right? We did all this work and they didn't appreciate it. They just left yet again, right? Or broke into the house yet again. And so, they're homeless yet again. And so what ends up happening is that we hyper-focus on just the emotional component of this experience, where I would suggest, I think, would be more helpful, and I've seen it in many of my sessions with clients, whether in group, family, individual therapy, is that if we can shift our perspective to not just, we acknowledge the emotional, right? We acknowledge that it hurts. But if we're able to shift our perspective a little bit and wanting to look at it more than just emotional, but also strategic, a strategic opportunity, a strategic situation in which kind of like brought me back to my father, who's no longer with us, but he used to play chess with me. So this is just to exemplify what I mean by strategic. He would say to me, I'm going to beat you in 7 moves. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you're quite confident. And I challenged him, yeah, go ahead and try to do that. And exactly as he said, by the 7th move, he was like, checkmate. And I'm like, I was blown away. I was like, how did he know? How did he figure that out? And what I learned quickly is that there were patterns in his move. Like he had already set up 2, 3, 4 moves ahead. So there's always a need to look at things in that way, to expand our lens and look at, what can be done ahead, right? Plan ahead. You're not going to go on a family trip and not prepare the items that you need for that family trip. You're going to put everything together and not do anything last minute. So what you want to do in dealing with these cycles, right, is having always a plan in place, right? Don't think at the last minute, what are we going to do? It's happening again, right? There has to be some safety, protective, preventive barriers or measures that can be put in place. And we can that's another conversation, but that can be put in place so that there's not this sense of because there is a big sense of powerlessness, lack of control, and so a little semblance of structure and consistency goes a long way.
So I hear you saying a couple things, just being consistent in your environment, and in being consistent in your environment, you have a plan in place.
Yeah.
So what when you talk about strategy, what strategic moves should a family have when the relapse hasn't happened, but they may be preparing for something that could happen down the line? What would you advise them? What small steps could they take?
Okay, so this is one thing that I failed to mention here as part of this process. One of the biggest issues is the person's readiness for change. And so if the person is not yet ready, there's nothing moving heaven and earth you can do to actually make them do anything that they're not ready to do. So if we're at a phase in their life where they're ready to make changes, then motivation in the person is key. So if we see something that tells us they are motivated to work on themselves, that gives us hope. You may not see the actual result in front of you, like the outcome. Like you can't go that far. And this is exactly what AA says to its addicts. It's one of Reynold Niebuhr's the Serenity Prayer. One day at a time, one moment at a time, right? So it's breaking all of this down, this huge, overwhelming thing that the family just doesn't know what to do, and breaking it down to smaller chunks. It's kind of like when we were kids. Our mama would, or caregiver, or father would, whoever was the guardian, would take a banana and wouldn't just give it to us like the whole banana. They would break it down in pieces so that we could digest it and consume it, be easier to receive. So this is what we have to do to ourselves. We got to be good to ourselves and breaking things down into smaller chunks, more realistic, more attainable in doing the things that we need to do. Now, we can get into like even more specifics what that means and what that looks like, but it's different for every family. So it's not like I'm going to say something and it's going to be a sweeping statement for every family. But there are some general guidelines, like I'm saying right now, in making things a little bit easier to digest and process and work with as a family.
So knowing that each family can be different, there's some general principles. I hear you when you say, there's the instinct to be emotional, to be upset, to be frustrated. But then there's also the call to plan ahead of that emotion, take the small steps, have that plan in place for when this moment happens or if it does happen. Could you share some examples? Maybe what would you counsel some of your clients that might come in, even though they're all different, but what would be some specific action steps that you might tell them to plan?
Well, if I'm noticing, for example, as a marriage and family therapist, I look at systems theory, and what we do is we notice if there's any triangulations that are going on, where you bring in a third person, when you see that things are going out of hand, you're working in the room, and you're in the present moment to see if there's some way that we can work through this issue. So we're using strategies like communication strategies, how we talk to each other, the way we address the problem, using statements that help bring us together and not pull us apart. For example, like using, rather than you, everything, always, never, as referring to the person, you never do it right, you always do this to us, look at what you're doing to the family. And attacking in that kind of aggressive manner will make the person shut down. So we've got to work to the most basic component, and that is how we speak to each other. And so it starts very basic, but it grows from there. And so that's just one example of using these statements instead of using the aggressive type of statements as you always, you never, and everything's your fault, and look at what you've done to us, and talking in more terms of, I feel that every time this happens, I'm disappointed. I'm heartbroken, and I don't know what else to do. I want to help you, but you got to help me too. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what we can do together as a family to make this work. So it's this idea of negotiation, flexibility. What I love about one of the modalities that I use in therapy is called narrative therapy, and narrative therapy is very flexible. It tells a story of a person's life, and then it allows the client to restructure, re-edit, delete or add or change the story in any way that they want. So bringing that kind of narrative approach to families is letting everyone say to themselves, it's okay if I make a mistake. I could always delete, cancel, and try again. I love what something that I heard, God rest his soul, Kobe Bryant, when he was alive. They asked him, Kobe, like in the big games, you shoot the ball and it sometimes doesn't go in, and he's like, yeah, I know. So why do you keep shooting? He's like, because eventually the shots will fall. And so the mentality, he would call that Mamba mentality. It's like, because eventually, I'm a professional. I'm at the highest level of my sport. I shoot 1,000 free throws, 1,000 three-pointers, and I still miss big shots in big games. But nothing stops me from trying again, because eventually the shots will fall. So it's this consistency that I referred to at the beginning that plays into this, because we need to be resilient. We need to have self-determination, and that's not acquired easily. That's something that is practiced. That's something that is learned as we get through life, right? We get through hardships. We build this tougher skin, and it doesn't just come naturally. It just happens over time. So we develop this. We notice it. We call attention to it. We identify it, and we say, that's what it is right there. We need to recognize it and see if we can try again. It's one of the strategies that I also use with some of my clients is I also tell clients that when they're talking to each other, right, there's a scapegoating, there's a blame going on. And so another specific strategy that I use with families is I teach them to stop, think, and then act. And so this 3-step process is kind of like a traffic light. Red light, right? Yellow light, green light. You put your mind through that process. So you think before you speak. Simple stuff. Consider before doing or acting or saying how that word or action will impact you and that other person. So this is where this all begins. We need to learn how to talk to each other. And if we don't know how to talk to each other, then we can't even do anything, and we can't even get a word across the table.
why is it so hard for families to kind of have this? Because I hear you say stop, think, and then act. And we might be teaching it to a client, a family member, in a community. We'd be talking about it, but why is it so hard to make that actually work when we're in that moment with the family member?
Yeah, in those moments, if you recall, I said thinking ahead, 2 or 3 steps ahead, right? So it's coming up with a plan. This is collaborative, and eventually we'll get at the end where we'll talk about resources. But it's about finding the tools, gaining the tools in a family setting to help the family work out the issues through different preemptive strategies, where if this happens, what do we do? And if this happens, what's next? I had a retired lieutenant when I used to work security many years ago. He asked me, he gave me a gun, he gave me all these things that I needed, tools that I needed for my job. And he said, what would you do if there's an active shooter? And I fumbled the question. I was all over the place with the answer. And he looked at me and he says, calm down. Let me give you 3 steps. It's either fight, flight, or hide. That's it. And how do you determine which one do you do? Well, proximity of the shooter. If the shooter is right in front of you, it's time to fight. So everything is in this issue, addiction, as a family, looking from the outside in, is looking at 2 or 3 steps ahead. What am I going to do? Walk away? What am I going to do? Am I going to recenter myself? Do some kind of calming exercise to get myself centered? Prayer, whatever it is that you need to do to calm yourself. Usually studies show that it takes about an hour for a person to kind of get themselves centered and calm and then re-engage. The issue is follow through. There has to be follow through. So if you have someone in the room who guides the family and says, this is what needs to be done, and there isn't a commitment to that change, everyone in that room has to be committed to that change. This is how we're going to change the dynamics. This is what you do. I've even told, to be honest, as a therapist, my kids call me out all the time. You're a therapist, you should know better. And so I've given my kids permission to call me out. I said, as long as you do it in a respectful way, you're allowed to call me out if I'm getting out of line. And so in one occasion, I recall my daughter, 14-year-old daughter, was like, Dad, you're out of line. You know, you're starting to get really agitated. Calm down. And so, but because I had given her permission to do that, what my participation in all that was, I've got to follow through. Because if I don't listen to her and I let my ego get the best of me, I snap at her for telling me that. And so what happens? She'll get frustrated. She'll get discouraged, disappointed that she thought, hey, Dad, but you told me this is what I need to do. And if I don't follow through, then it's on me. So it's nuanced like that. You know, it's not quite, this is why I'm saying it's not like we have this brushstroke answer for everything, but we do have general guidelines as to how to approach the problem.
I got to say, it is, first off, very reassuring that I'm not the only therapist that has issues with my kids. So thank you for validating that experience for me. Yeah. And also, thank you for just being so humble and sharing that example. I think sometimes, I hear this a lot, right, from people that are going through addiction and there's conflict with their family, and you hear 2 sides of what they both want. Yeah. But that concept, that idea of like letting the ego go, to be able to follow through with some plans, to be able to stay calm, and even that personal example you shared within your own family about a moment where you needed to kind of listen to what was being said here. Yeah. It's a challenge that a lot of families say of power, and struggle and shame, and sometimes in some cultures, like, what will people say? Yeah. My marriage isn't perfect, or my children aren't perfect, or this addiction has crept up. And because you're in a very unique place, because you have experience working in ministry and also in counseling, and this program here is being hosted here within a church community. Given your experience there, what is it that you would offer to families that are in communities where maybe it is hard to say something's going wrong?
Yeah, sometimes it's not. We're in a. This is another thing that we forgot to kind of. I'm going to circle back to talking about environment. I mean, we live in a society where social media TikTok, Facebook, all this thing happens on a daily. Kids call it doom scrolling. You're just going through your phone and you're just hours pass by. But in the most crucial moments, it's not TikTok that's going to save you. It's not the online community that's going to help you. It's that one or two persons in your life that you can go to and for support, right? And being able to talk to that person in some kind of confidence and saying, I can go to you. I even had a pastor who went through a crisis in my time in the ministry, and he said, what do I do? Like, I can't even talk to another pastor because they're all busy. Like, I feel like a burden if I call a pastor up and a colleague. And I said, I referred him to a actual ministry. This is where resources come in, pastoral care. And I said, they've created this program for pastors like yourself and me that we can call these numbers and talk to someone online 24 hours if we need some kind of, confidentiality to talk about our issues as human beings. And so what I'm saying is this issue, this thing is, people are afraid to talk, speak up. But if you can identify at least one or two people in your life, there might be a family member, there might not. There might be a friend, there might not. There might be a colleague, might not. A mentor, who knows? The way I've done it in my life is very unique ways that I've created connections. I remember before I became a therapist, one of the things that a mentor told me, he said, if you want to know what the outcome will be to start a new career, start at the end. And I said, what do you mean start at the end? Go look at all the job descriptions, look at what they're asking for, and make a list of the items you need to do to get that training. And so start at the end. And I said, oh, okay. And so I worked from the end at the beginning. And so I worked towards that goal. So when we're talking about this issue, how families deal with addiction and families that are struggling with family members that are going through this, is a series of numerous things. It's bringing in another person. It's seeking other resources. There's an army of things that can be done to fortify the need for disclosure, the need for some kind of leaning on something or someone for support. So if it's not clinical, there are other ways. I usually even advise some of my families to go together at family resource centers. In Southern California, where I'm from, they have lots of family resource centers that they can go together and do yoga. They can go together and do various number of courses like cooking classes, things that help them bond. Speaking of bonding, the innate nature of us as a human race to want to bond and connect. So these activities, these shared activities create a bond, a memory, that helps build that connection, that maybe in some cases that's never been done for some individuals. So
that's a powerful strategy and intervention that you're offering, which is and it's simple. It's simple. It's just spend time with each other, make memories. And I'm glad that you brought it back to how we all started when we were talking about addiction being a relationship bond. Yeah. But it sounds like what you're saying is that one way to counter that is for families to be intentional about creating bonds with each other. And I'll ask one last question, and then we're going to open up the space for questions here in the audience too. When we talk about that relational bond, what happens when you have differences between the family members who want to support the individual that's going through recovery or addiction, and maybe they're different, and it could be different from differences in philosophy, in vision, religion, spirituality, and there's this kind of, I don't know if you've experienced this or seen this, but it's almost like a break, like we don't understand each other, we can't relate. So how do you build a bond when they're so separate from each other?
There are many examples I can pull from, but just in general terms, families that have been resistant to certain types of medical procedures or certain kind of resources that I offer because of faith or because their beliefs are different and they fight over like how to approach this problem. So some would say, seek this, yeah, sure, I'll do it, and the other one disagrees and says, I'm not doing that. So one example that I can bring to mind is a family that was a faith-based family, and they basically went through a process of decision making. What are we going to do for our problem? And so they came up with, desire to be in therapy, right? Let's go to therapy and let's figure this out. So when I was in therapy with them, what it came down to is I had to put on my hat of meaning that I needed to be in their shoes, my empathy hat, and try to put myself in their shoes and try to understand where they were coming from. And so from their own context, I pulled an example to help them think outside the box. Because rigid ways of thinking, those are barriers. When we are rigid in our way of thinking, it's a huge barrier. I like to think that in a daily life, we often don't notice how many times we break the law in the sense, and let me explain what I mean by that. If you run a red light, right, it's going to be, if someone sees you, if not, accident or a ticket, right? But is there a scenario where you can go on a red light? Absolutely. When you turn right. So there's always some other way. Why then do counties and governments allow, law enforcement allow for those kind of things? Flow of traffic, whatever the reason is, you can turn right on a red light. Well, the same thing happens in other things, right? Lying is, for some people, it's moral clarity. Lying is wrong. But then there's a little bit of moral ambiguity. Well, if it's a birthday party, maybe lying is okay, right? So what I mean by all that is when we're approaching this, we have to have a flexible way of approaching the problem. So we can't just come in rigid thoughts, and they're not helpful. They cause thinking traps. And we feel like we're stuck in this box. So with this family, what I did was I spoke to them about their perspective on the story of Eden. And so, the Lord created the animals. The Lord created all the garden, beautiful garden. I mean, Adam, I asked him the question, did Adam have everything he wanted? Yes. Water, the best. The food, the best. The company, the best. And on top of that, he walked with God. But yet, something was missing. Because according to the story, God said, it is not good for man to be alone. So it wasn't enough to have God's company. It wasn't enough to have the perfect garden. It wasn't enough to have the animals. It wasn't enough to have the purest water. I mean, from a mental health perspective, that's like ideal conditions for your mental health, right? And on top of that, I get to walk with God. That's amazing. But yet, Adam was lonely. And so when I mentioned that, I said, there's sometimes something other than God himself directly that God can use indirectly to help us. And that could be another person or another something that can equally fill that gap. That doesn't necessarily come from God directly in the sense of like God being present, walking with you, but indirectly in providing another way to give you that healing, give you that, that comfort, right? Because most addicts, all they need to know is that they're loved and they're not alone.
And that's a big thing of what you've talked about this entire time, which is relational bonds.
Yeah.
And knowing that someone goes to a substance because it fills a need. It takes care of the anxiety, pressure, and then eventually this connection and that relationship that builds. And what you've offered us here tonight is just an overview of how families can build that bond and replace that addiction or rebuild with different strategies, different ways, communication as well. You've given us a lot in there. Well, the night's not over, so we're passing around the microphone here for a couple questions. We're going to leave room for about 2 or 3 questions in the crowd. So if someone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand. We've got an expert here, so this is the man to ask questions.
I got a quick question about, you talked about family systems or family units, and I think when you have somebody active in addiction, it seems like one of the risks is that others become isolated. You talked about the isolation causing the problem, and then I've seen this situation kind of grows, right? So other kids become isolated, other family members become isolated, and that whole family system gets all jumbled up. And What do you say to families that are going through that, or they're trying to manage through that? And, do you have any advice for them on how to lean in with the other kids or other family members that might ultimately become victim just because they became isolated along the way?
It's trial and error. So I'll give you an example, bringing back my daughter into this picture. Often with kids, whether they're dealing with addiction or not, or problems, other things like that, the issue here is knowing to recognize that maybe your timing is not the right timing. So if I go at my child and I say, how did school go? And she's like, fine. If I keep pressing her, she'll get mad at me because that's not the moment. She doesn't want to. She doesn't want to engage. And so what I found is the other day, my wife takes her to school. And, she's out there, and she's like, Mom, don't drop me off yet. Like, can we talk for like 20 minutes? And I was like, what? And she's revealing this to me, and I felt like I struck gold. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the key, right? And then she said, why don't you take her next time? Maybe she'll want to open up then. And we've discovered that for her, 20 minutes before school starts, that's the moment to bond. And she is a parrot, the way she talks about everything. And I don't even have to struggle to get a word out. I'm like, this is amazing. Why didn't we figure this out a long time ago? But if I would have insisted on, you need to, I need to know, respect me, right? Rigid thoughts, right? Like, respect me. I would have frustrated her, and she would have been more isolated and not wanting to share anything. And I think that is the first key is it's not always your timing. It's letting the family member cue you on their timing. Thank you. Yeah.
We have time for additional questions. Great answers coming in, so please ask questions now.
Gerson, thanks, first of all, for being here. Wow, what open conversation. And you make a great point of, I have a personal experience with this, and it was my wife, and we had one child at home at that time, and I always took it personal that I'm trying to help you and you don't want help. But the problem was she didn't know what she needed or how to get help. And maybe if you could just expand a little bit more, the bonding thing is intriguing to me. Because if you can remove just a moment of her pain, and to Russ's point, you got 3 or 4 people in the family unit. If you can come to a neutral bonding spot, that makes total sense to me. I've never heard that put that way, but maybe expand on how you pull that together, and does it matter what you're doing to bond at that moment?
Yeah, I'm going to start from the timing piece. So I've had moments with children that are not my own, obviously, in the work that I do. I had one particular memory of a child that didn't want to come into the room to talk to me because they felt forced. You're forcing me to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. Like these foster children, they feel like they're in substance abuse. They're chemically dependent. And I have no control over my life. I'm in a system that I have no control over, and I need to actually talk to you, who I don't know. And so how I find bonding opportunities or opportunities for connection with a child, because we're talking about children here, is that I recognized right away that it wasn't that he didn't want to talk per se. It's just not right now. And so what I said to him was, and he was just like leaning on the doorway and kind of like resisting to come in for a little while. And I just like, turned my head and I said, it's okay. You don't have to come in right now. I know they told you to come talk to me. I'll just leave my door open, and whenever you want to come and talk to me, you can, all right? And so I just stood there, and not even 5 minutes, he was already sitting right here in front of me. And I'm like, this is amazing. So bonding starts with giving the other person choice. Give them choice. If they feel that they have something that's in their control. Because especially if they're chemically dependent. They feel like they have no power, no control, no say. On top of that, you are making them talk to you in a moment that they're not ready to talk. Again, comes back to timing. Accepting, having some kind of humility. I think those two ingredients, humility and grace. I tell couples, I do couples therapy too, and I tell them 2 elements. First of all, no secrets, but 2 elements. For us to get through this conflict, whatever it is, alcoholism, whatever it is, we're going to need humility and grace. And that resonates with people of faith. And I talk to them about humility and grace. And so that's really what it is. It's about having the humility of saying, it doesn't have to be my way. It's just, there is a way. I just have to be open to allowing it to happen naturally. And we allow that humility kind of like sink in and say, you know what? Don't always got all the answers. I don't always got this figured out. I'm going to be open to some, just letting it play out and leaving the child with an option. And I think that's been what's worked for me. Not going to say it's 100%, but I will say that it's a start. Yeah.
We have one more question here in the front. We have 2 more questions. Yes, here in the front.
That kind of answered my question, but it was, you answered it with timing. And my question was, when you have someone who's struggling with deep shame from the addiction, how you can help them. Yes, there's timing, but is there anything else that we could do and step in or give space for?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the idea of being flexible and not rigid, right? The concept there that I added to the timing was an invitation. So we can lay out an invitation to do almost anything, right? Hey, I found this. I wanted to share this with you. You want to watch it with me, right? And you leave it open to that possibility. And if you do it enough and you leave it as an invitation only, then what that creates is you're implanting an idea that our relationship, that's what it's going to look like. We're going to invite each other into our spaces. You're welcome into my space. Anytime you want to talk to me, here I am, right? Hey, I'm playing my guitar. You want to join me, right? Let's sing, right? No, thank you. But if you're kind and gentle, see, here's the thing. I want to make sure that I answer this correctly. When it comes to physical pain, we all know what to do. We all know what to do. Like someone scrapes their hand, bumps their knee. Oh, okay, well, let's put some ice on it. Let's clean the wound. Let's put some Neosporin in there and wrap it up and go fight, win the game, whatever it is. Or maybe even give it a kiss, right? If the child allows. And if it's not enough and the child keeps crying or the person keeps, asking for help, we raise the level of care, right? All right, well, let's go to the hospital. It's obvious that you need stitches. The bleeding doesn't stop, right? So we know exactly the steps. We got that figured out. We got it down. But what we don't got down is how to deal with emotional pain. We don't know what do we do with that? I don't know in my family, we weren't taught that. What is that? I couldn't even open up to my dad, right? And let alone my mom. My mom wasn't even part of my life. So we never learned what it was like to heal from that. And so what I would like to suggest is another way to bond or connect is, it's quite simple, okay? It's very simple. It's kind of like when a mother has a child who's kicking and screaming, I want this. And psychologists have proven this is 100% correct. Is it when you say no, don't cave in. No is no. It's simple. It's simple. No is no, and that's it. And the child eventually will get the message. No is no. But if the mother caves in and says, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, oh my gosh, here, take it. The child learns that that's the way to do it. You push her far enough, you'll break her. You got her, right? So the idea of emotional pain is simple. It's simple just like that, in that we need to be gentle. That's it. Like, no one, when someone gets injured, says, well, maybe it does happen. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but it shouldn't. Why? What happened? Why did you do that? Like, what we do as parents is we go looking for where the injury is. That's the very first thing we're looking for. We're not looking for a big explanation. We're going straight at the wound, and we're addressing the wound, figuratively and literally. And then once we've patched it up and made sure that the child is calm, as therapists, we do this. We look at the symptoms first, we calm the client first, and then we can talk about it. What's going on? So what we do is simple. It can be done. It takes practice. It takes humility and grace. It takes patience. We need to approach it gently. Not with why or how or when. It's like, tell me about that pain.
Thank you. We have one last question here up front.
I think the bonding for me kind of stuck out, just like with what Waylon was mentioning with the teenager versus the teenager if it's a spouse. The gentleness has been there, and I think I'm just wanting to kind of understand what kind of coping or advice you could provide for somebody who has PTSD, deals with alcoholism, and I've suggested many bonding activities outside of home to keep him from being isolated in his safe space, but nothing works. So, like, what advice do you have for a suffering Susan, versus, somebody who was more controlling before, to get him, to help him,
There's many ways to do this, but I would say one way, right? And we could talk afterwards and we can go over a list of other things we can do, but that's exactly where I'm going, a list. So sometimes what I've done with, this is any age, any group. It's something called the 10-10-10 list. And basically what it is that you're taking 10 things that the person loves to do, right? So they itemize the things they love to do. So it gets them writing it down. What I've often noticed that some patients, clients will say to me, if I write it down, it helps. And so I say, well, then write it down, right? I love the scene I'm a big movie guy, you know this, Renee. I love the scene where Indiana Jones' father sends his son to go find the book, where the book has everything, right? The father's writings about the Holy Grail. And he says, Indy says to his dad, Dad, you sent me into the lion's den. Like, you almost got killed getting this book. Why couldn't you just put it to your memory? Like, all you had to do was memorize it. He's like, I put it in a book so I wouldn't have to remember. And so, to me, that says it all right there. Sometimes we just need to write it down. So, 10 things I love to do. 10 things I'm grateful for. That's another one. And 10 things I desire. Meaning into the future. And if you can get something written down, it lays out the best way to get someone to act is not for you to direct them necessarily. I mean, there's moments, I'm not going to say, there are moments where you do need to, life and death, 911, right? You need to direct the person. But when it comes to like more suggestive, nuanced kind of things, what motivates the client is when it's their idea. And you give that power to them. Write down the things that you love to do. It starts a conversation. Wow, I didn't know, I forgot that you love doing that. Oh, things that you're grateful for. I can't think of anything, right? Well, that sparks a conversation about gratitude, right? What can we be grateful for? Look, guys, I didn't mention my son. The other day, he's like telling me, we were talking about being a good dad. What is a good dad? What is a bad dad? And so he used an example of like, I don't know where he was going with, but eventually I caught wind of what he was saying. And I basically brought it down to the example of what makes a dog owner a good dog owner. And he said, well, you feed it, you clean it, you take it to the vet, you love it, and you take care of it, right? I said, okay, well, because he had told me, this is the thing, he had told me, Dad, you can't tell me because you're a provider, you're doing great, like you're a great, and I'm like, that hurts my feelings. Like I'm working hard to provide for this family. Well, you're just doing the basics. That's like, I didn't ask you to make me. I didn't ask you to have me, and you're just doing the basics. And I'm like thinking to myself, well, that sounds ungrateful. And so sometimes kids today, some, not all, don't know how to be grateful. So if you challenge them, right? And I did challenge my son. I said, and then, at some point he got quiet because he knew where I was going with that analogy of a good owner, right? Obviously, he's not a dog. He was the one who brought up the analogy of the dog, by the way. It wasn't me. And so I was like, oh, since you're talking about dogs, well, what makes a good owner, right? And so I said, at the end of the day, I go, being grateful goes a long way, right? Because there is a lot of despair in being a family member or a friend of a person that is an addict, right? There's a lot of despair, hopelessness, helplessness, powerlessness, and you lose any sense of admiration or gratitude of anything because it's all dark. And so making that list, conscientiously making a list of items that you are grateful for can help spark a conversation. If there's nothing that they have, it sparks a conversation. And if they do have some things, and it brings up the positive when all you sometimes need is that little evidence that gives you hope. So anyways, and I did mention the third one, right? That the third one was things that they desire, right? Things that they want into the future. So things they love doing now, things that they're grateful for, and things that they desire into the future. Yeah.
Well, Garrison, we're not leaving the building here, so there will still be time and space to capture your wisdom and your experience here. And I want to thank you for making time. You have an amazing family. You have an amazing just life history. And here you are, you're sharing with everyone. And we're just very appreciative for everything you've shared tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to speak to the audience and also those online. And I really feel like this was an awesome opportunity. I feel excited for the things to come.
Well, this is what you're seeing here is what we have every Monday night. Next week, we will have Dr. Fiona Conway, who's an expert in addiction, and she'll be bringing in very personal research that she has created around the heart, and not just emotion, but literally, physically, what's happening to hearts during addiction. And there's an amazing, amazing, powerful week that we're going to have next Monday. And we have speakers coming in over the next couple weeks. So just know, keep an eye on our website. We've got our next few speakers lined up. This is a space to build community, to learn together. And one thing I take away, among many things, is about the relationship and about walking through life with others, too, and how important that is. So again, the CARES program aims to provide that support, to provide education, and to provide the resources. So we'll be here next Monday night. Thank you all for coming out here. This is just a special program, and every week we all learn something more here. So thank you for helping us grow. And I can't forget, if this is your very first time here, whether in person or online, I'd just like to say one special message. Welcome home. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next Monday. Thank you.